Welcome to Let's Talk Death, conversations to inform and inspire. Let's Talk Death is a series of conversations with some amazing people from various fields. Our goal through these conversations is to normalize, educate, and demystify the taboo around death, dying, and the journey of grief. Hello, welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Death. I'm Fran Solomon.
And I'm Andy McNeil.
And we're thrilled to be your host for these conversations. Let's Talk Death is brought to you by Heal Grief, a social support network creating community after someone has died. Everything we do is inspired by our core belief that no one should ever grieve alone.
Our goal with this program is to have a friendly chat with some amazing people so we can help normalize and educate our Heal Grief community. Our guest today is Oshri Hakak. Oshri is an author, artist, and musician based in Los Angeles, California. He loves creating illustrated books about unconventional topics for children and grown-ups to help people live more adaptive and happy lives. Recently, Oshri co-authored an illustrated book about grief called When Their Bodies Leave Them. Oshri, we are delighted to have you as a guest on our show.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be with both of you here today.
Thank you so much. Oshri, I have to ask, what inspired you to co-author a book about grief? Do you have a personal experience?
Yeah, I have a couple actually, and as does my friend and co-author Cecilia Winkle, who wrote the book with me. We had been kind of like WhatsApp voice message pen pals for a while, so she would reflect about her mother's passage about 10 years ago, and my brother passed away. It was about 9 years ago, I think, and we would kind of go back and forth processing grief together as friends. We've actually never met in person, but we worked on that project together. So yes, my brother died when it was my older brother. He died when he was 34. And it was a heart arrhythmia. And it was also in the midst of quite severe struggles with mental health too. Like there was a lot he was dealing with at the same time, and then his body gave out. And it's been a lot of processing, and that book is honestly, I love sharing it, but I think it was an important part of my processing as well.
So how did the two of you come up with the idea?
Yeah, she had messaged me in the flow of our back and forth. She had said something like, she said the phrase, their bodies leave them, or something that she had heard from some speaker, or when, and just like kind of switching it around, like when, because we're used to saying, okay, when people leave their bodies, or when we leave our bodies. And then she had noted that phrasing from somewhere else, and it just kind of, I love making books, and I find like all I really need is like a seed of strong enough inspiration. And I can kind of see the whole thing kind of not in an exact way, but in a felt way. So when she mentioned that phrase, I kind of said, okay, we're going to work on a book like that. And then I think it was within a week or two, I woke up one morning and I wrote like the first draft, and then she wrote hers independently. And then we just kind of meshed it together, and it fit really well, I thought.
Interesting. Yeah. It's interesting the two of you were having the conversations, supporting one another, which I find for people in grief, to have a person who will actually listen to you and not just try to give you advice, but hear you, and then you hear them, you return that favor. It's one of the best things that you can have happen. We have so many people who even attend our groups that say, I just don't have anyone who I can talk to. So they go to these groups, but it sounds like having, and through a WhatsApp too. I mean, that's amazing to me.
In another country. She lives in Copenhagen. Yeah, we had connected kind of serendipitously from, I think she had entered actually through Instagram, like a raffle for, like, I put out like a book giveaway for another one of my books, and she'd
Yeah.
entered it, and then anyway, we just got like conversing, and it was over months, and then one day, like, it got to there, and yeah, I'm very grateful that I mean, that interconnectivity has been so important in my processing, for sure.
So tell me a little bit about the title. I found the title intriguing myself, and here's what it reminded me of, and
Yeah.
I would love to hear kind of where that came from and where you went with it. But for me, when I first read the title, I thought of my mother who died from breast cancer, and her body just withered into, like, her body was not useful to her anymore, and that when I read that title, when their bodies left them, and I thought, man, her body left her long before, she was, like, she still had more that she wanted to do while she was here. And so that's the connotation it brought in my mind. But I'm interested to know about that concept and where the two of you took that in your writing.
Yeah, I think a lot of it had to do with our experiences of her mom, and I could be mistaken, but her mom also may have died of breast cancer also.
Yeah.
But she and my brother, we were actually talking about our experience of them uh after they were gone. I know, like, I've had a lot of profound experiences with my brother that have been honestly so helpful and giving me a sense of experience of them beyond the point where their bodies left them.
Yeah.
So that, I think that was part of it. I think really wanted the book to be like maybe like a seed of inspiration for, like, yes, you can connect with someone who's passed, and it's in a very personal, intimate way. Doesn't mean that at all. That doesn't mean that you don't grieve them or
Yeah.
mourn them. It doesn't mean that you deny the feelings and emotions that well up inside you. It just means that there you can have additional experiences that can be very healing for, and also I would say instructive and inspiring for what our missions are in this, while our bodies are still with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Now, so tell me a little bit about the book and how it's constructed. Is it an illustrated children's book? Is it just a book geared toward children, more a chapter type book, or how did that come together, and what
Yeah. It's
story?
not, yeah, well, there's not really chapters. Although I did have a friend I gave the book to recently who said she was reading it like a couple pages at a time. She has a friend who passed very recently.
Hmm.
Maybe a woman in her 20s who also had cancer, and she said she'd read it every couple pages at a time and then cry and then, like, wait the next day. So you can divide it how you like, because there's definitely, I think, sections of like focus. Um, I think I kind of get into some trouble, if that's what you want to call it, with some of my books because they're not like this. Some people don't want to talk about death, and
Yeah.
especially with children, they're not there. And I do think that if one were to decide to have a conscious conversation and opening up with a child about death, I think this would be a good book for it. I also don't like to be the one that tells people, like, this is what you should read for your kids. So it's a personal choice. So that's kind of the line it dances when it's a topic that our society doesn't embrace in a homogenous way, and I honor that but I do think it could be good for kids and for adults. Yeah. So
I also love that you did a video.
yeah, and that's Cecilia's voice. Cecilia, the co-author, she's reading it, and I think she actually does some voice work too. I think she has an incredible speaking voice. And then my friend Nick playing flute and sitar. And yeah, thanks. I thought it came out quite nicely.
Yeah, I agree with you. Our society doesn't deal with death well, and particularly when it comes to children. I've often wondered if it's that, but to me the flip side of that, or maybe it's the conundrum of our society, and that is
Yeah.
that we entertain ourselves with death and die.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like most movies, like Hollywood and that type of thing,
Yeah.
most of them have death themes. Even movies just about someone dying, or a lot of our main characters are bereaved as we go into the story, and then
Mhm.
that's part of what they're working through, and or it's violent death or that type of thing. So we entertain ourselves with it, but then when it
Right.
comes to having the conversation, it's almost as if we don't want to personalize it in some way, or I don't know what that
Yeah.
might be.
No,
Yeah.
I agree. I think there's like kind of a nuttiness around it because if you look at like most popular movies, like yeah, they're all like a lot of violent death. That kind
Yeah.
of discreet, you have like whatever, you have even like kids or teen movies, you have like the henchmen who like they just die. Like what that's a person,
Right.
and but
Right.
it's treated so casually. Yeah, it's disturbing, and there is a certain it's like on the one hand we don't want to become like morbid, but it's like
Right.
all we talk about is death. But on the other hand, you want to understanding and processing death appropriately is part of honoring life. And if you have a lot of media addressing death so casually and nonchalantly, it kind of dishonors what life is, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, I
I
agree.
also I also think it's especially for children who don't really understand. They'll see an actor die in one show and then they're in the next show. So the sense of death
Yeah,
is not necessarily permanent. And how do you explain that to a child? I mean, I just I find that a bit challenging.
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's a lot there, and there's a lot that we're presenting kids with that's not for like their optimal social and emotional well-being,
Yeah.
and I do like, yeah, it's nice to feel like I'm created something that maybe a kid could benefit from. I know, I mean, I did talk about my brother. I would say my first, I don't know, I don't know if it's been more than some or others, but I did have a friend, not my closest friend, who died of cancer when I was it's probably about 10 years old. He was a teammate on my baseball team. So that, and then I would say one of the most impactful times when I was 16, my Boy Scout master ended his life right after it's actually kind of profound that we're having this conversation today, because yesterday was 20 years since I completed my Eagle Scout project. And my Scoutmaster, I didn't know, but I think he kind of planned that. So like I would finish my project and then he'd be like, all right, peace out now, and he did a couple weeks later, and he had been terminally ill for 8 years, with a life expectancy of about 6 months for 8 years. So uh, it's a situation I definitely have compassion and understanding for. And as a 16-year-old, I don't know. I mean, it was a lot, and I mean, even with some therapy and that's been another great sharing context in the last couple of years. There's been more of that kind of that's been bubbling up. But like, how did I process that when I was 16? How is it coming up now? How has it shaped my world and the relationships around me. And yeah, it can be difficult, and you have to, yeah, I mean, it's nice to, I have a hope that I put in some energy into helping kids healing that. I think there's not a coincidence that the real energy for this project came out around COVID and like the ending of COVID, because we
Yeah.
have just experienced so much death in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And a weird thing with this book was, I say weird, like each project I think kind of challenges you at the the point of the statement you're making. And there was a basically there's a bunch of like mini snafus between me and the designer, like little mistakes that would happen and like prolong the completion for like a couple more days, and happen about, yeah, each delay was like 2 to 5 days maybe, and it happened about 10 to 12 times. And each time I would have a dream the next morning where I'd get a visit, or I'd see someone who I know had died. And any time in my life, honestly. It was like, oh yeah, gotta add them to the dedication page. Oh yeah, they want to be remembered too. So I go back to the designer. She need a couple more days. I'm like, sorry, this is just what's happening now. Gotta add them. They want to be there too, And so there is that.
Wow.
That
Yeah.
it's the honoring. You think about Andy, your mom, and Fran, I believe your father, and there's a lot of the work we can do around grief is really, I think it really honors the life that they had and the continuation of life that we represent. Something very fulfilling and meaningful about it.
Yeah. I agree with that 100%. At least that's been my experience. It's interesting. I took a vacation recently to Costa Rica, and I had not been back there. I was 3 and 4 years old when we lived there when I was a child. My parents were in language school there. And it was an interesting, it was a vacation, but at the same time, uh, it was interesting to be somewhere where my parents had been years ago when I really wasn't fully conscientious of it because I was so young and I only have images in my head. Um, but to go to certain places and think, they walked this place.
Wow.
It wasn't just physical experience. It was a very spiritual kind of experience
Yeah.
with it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, we're running. This has been a great conversation. Time has flown by, and we're
Yeah.
almost out of time. But
Yeah.
before we end our time, uh, how can people who are viewing this episode, how can they connect with you, connect with your work? How might they go about doing that?
Yeah. Thanks for that. Uh, my books are on Amazon. They're also on my website, which is Butterfly, spelt Butterfly on like Nancy books, butterflyonbooks.com. And I also post art regularly and music on my Instagram, which is just my first name, last name on Instagram, Oshri Hakak. So yeah, and I reply to messages through my website and Instagram and all that. This has been a real privilege too, and I appreciate what the community have put together for people around us.
Oshri, thank you. Thank you for that. And we want to thank you for being a guest here on Let's Talk Death and for sharing the inspiration and story behind your work.
Thank you.
And we'd like to thank those who are joining us for this episode of Let's Talk Death. And if you'd like to learn more about Heal Grief, please visit us at healgrief.org. At healgrief.org, you can learn more about all of the programs and resources we have, including our national network of support for grieving young adults called Actively Moving Forward.
And if you know of a bereaved adult, refer them to our AMF app, where adults of all ages connect with others experiencing a similar death loss. And last, make sure to sign up on healgrief.org to receive our newsletter for links to future episodes of Let's Talk Death.
So with that, again, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time on Let's Talk Death.